Now, I'm a fan of one-to-one prequel solo play, as has been evidenced in a gaming talk video I made previously on the subject that you can see annotated on screen now. But just quickly to get on that point, it gives the GM and the player new to a campaign and system some invaluable experience to be able to experience it before lifetime of actually having to go to the table. And it also gives the character a little bit of background so that they've lived a bit of history and then come to the table. They're that touch more richer than they would have been. I'm going to be GMing Dragon Age Roleplay in the upcoming, so I wanted to run one of these with one of our players. Now, they all worked out what they were going to play. One of them was going to be a Circle Mage. Now, I do have to point out from the beginning that there was an unfortunate circumstance that happened as the session went on and towards the end. The player had some personal, emotional problems. I don't really want to go too much into details, but as a result of this player's issues, was unable to conclude the session to an extent that we were unable to do it whatsoever. We basically had a breaking down of communication and ability to see it through, and this was due to, well, frankly, the player being a bit of an asshole, actually. Because of anonymity, I'm not going to say who it was. I will just say that once the campaign starts, you won't know who it is anyway, because they rolled a new character. None of our starting characters are going to be Circle Mages. So what I'm trying to say, and the only reason I'm explaining this, is because this story with the lead character doesn't end with the lead character. It has a conclusion. It's a historic event that's supposed to have never happened, that I dreamed up. But it doesn't have an ending involving the character. And we'll explain that. But I wanted to say that beforehand so you're not let down towards the end. But there's some really interesting things that happen along the way. And I did all the work of coming up with it, creating it, so that we could play around with it. So I wanted to share it with you, and kind of how it went down. So we are here to recap what happened back then. Right, so our adventure kicks off with a period of history around about the year 924, which is about 4 years after the Orlesian-Ferelden War. So Orlais is now just about at peace. Just after a war, things are a bit tenuous anyway, and sometimes certain people might come along and try and agitate the climate to try and get something happening again. And that's what this story is based around, an agitator. A well-meaning concept from the Orlesian state decided to try and extend a hand of friendship towards Ferelden by sending some mages of their circle to Ferelden's Circle Tower. Now, the idea it would be that even though they are different nations of different languages and different ideals, and they've just been at war, they will, because they are officials of circles, they will at least speak the same language, that being magic, you see. And we all know anyway that the Circle Mages are just pawns working for the wishes of the Chantry anyway. So, these high-ranking high mages, these dignitaries, were supposed to be travelling to the tower for a visit. There was going to be some festivities, some food and drink arranged just outside the tower. So the Orlesian mages arrived, and they've been staying there as guests, but on the first night of them staying is where we meet our player, our Circle Mage player, and we carry on from his perspective of what happens next. So our mage is having a dream, and he's walking through a cemetery, and he sees all the gravestones, and the names on them are familiar. They're the names of his fellow mages. Now, at this point, he is no longer an apprentice. Well, he sort of is, but he's a past apprentice. He's had his harrowing, and he's living on the second floor of the tower, and he's sleeping there in the dormitory. Anyway, he's going through this graveyard, and he sees all of these familiar names, and then he sees a grave in particular that takes great discomfort in attempting to look at, but then he finally manages to pull his eyes onto the gravestone, and lo and behold, it's his own name on there. But the shock of this is disturbed by voices calling up from the ground, all calling his name, all around him, creating this sense of tension and growing anxiety. And then the vision snaps over to from night to day, and he actually sees, like some sort of almost psychic connective vision, the Orlesian visitors stranded on the road with their ride taken, their luggage taken, their ID taken, and standing around wondering what to do next. And he knows that they are the Orlesian mages, just somehow deep within himself, and he can see that they are also wearing the robes of that order, but he can also see that they aren't the ones that visited the tower. Well, anyway, this strange pain makes him snap awake, and he sees this tiny impish demon thing on his face, going to try and prod him with its talons. And so he quickly flicks it off, and it flies through the air. It's just a tiny thing, you know. It can't sustain itself for very long. Flies through the air and just dissipates back into the fade where it came from. So he gets himself out of bed and grabs his quarterstaff quickly, and he looks around him and he sees that some of the other apprentices are still asleep in their beds as well. But there's one of them in particular who's got another imp, and it's crawling up his chest and it's about to claw and rake his face or whatever. So he grabs the quarterstaff and swings it across and whacks the thing flying off the guy, and it goes flying and dissipates. So these things aren't really a challenge, but it does clue him into the fact that something's up with the demonic realm. These very minor entity demons are somehow able to appear. He tries waking up the guys in the beds. They won't respond. Nothing he does will rouse them from their sleep. So he determines that this must be some sort of magical slumber spell upon them. And there are these strange lights coming from the window of the dorm. And there's this ominous flashing that keeps going across the wall and creating these shadows to move across the wall, and then flashes again, and it's sort of intermittent. It just comes round again and round again like that, eventually. But he resists the temptation to check the window, and instead goes for the door. This realisation that something deeply is off with the place is really growing in him, in his intuition. And some sort of feeling like he doesn't really want to open that door. But he opens it anyway, slowly, carefully. And what he sees beyond that door isn't the hallway he was expecting, no. What he sees is something I described closer, more reminiscent to what happened in Ghostbusters when they opened up the fridge. Do you remember? And he saw the exposed fade. Now, this wasn't a tear, a rupture in the fade. That hadn't happened. And, of course, we know that hasn't happened in the canon. So, what's going on here? Well, I'll tell you. Some sort of event has occurred, and it created a scratch, a welt. Now, we know that scratches can bleed as well. And that blood, if you like, is demons escaping into our world. Or into Thedas, anyway. Swirling vortexes and craziness. Not the fade that he recognised during his harrowing. Not at all. That was more structured. There was ground. You know, there was terrain. You could make sense of things. This is all up in the air. It's up in the sky. It's just around about. Because there's a real bluster of it. And it's just pinks and weird colours and hues. And it's just horrible. So he quickly closes the door again. Because it's just a sheer fall if he tries going out there. So he goes over to the window and has a look out. And opens the window and takes a look. So what he sees outside is all of the Templars, or nearly all of them, trapped. What's really going on here behind the scenes is that an ex-Orlesian first enchanter, and they're the highest one that run the mages, an ex-Orlesian one, and notice I say ex, very, very powerful mage indeed, now on the run from his own state, I might add, had devised this plan to try and agitate trouble in between the two again, and to try and bring about, basically, the Knight Commander of the Chantry to grant a huge rite of cleansing to wipe out the Circle Mages of Ferelden, thus weakening them in a militarial sense for further devices to reinstigate the war. He got a load of blood mages together, and they decided to impersonate the Circle Mages that were going to come here, and they are mages, but blood mages. So they obviously took the clothing and took the ID and the belongings and all the other things, and they've gone here apparently as that. Now the deception worked. They were able to present all the correct papers, and they're expected as well. They gave some excuse why their Templar retinue is no longer there. They explained that their Templars had been terribly delayed trying to deal with some outbreaks of blood mages that had been seen in the area. Well, yes, there had been blood mages in the area. They were standing right in front of them. But anyway, they'd let them into the tower, thinking they are indeed the Orlesian Circle Mages they were expecting. The Templars had all been sitting at one big long bench together, having their meal. Because of the nature between the Templars and the Mages, they're not allowed to get too close or form friendships or relationships. So they have to sit all at their own tables apart like that. Because the Templars do live on site, you see, to control over the Mages. And at any point, they have to be able to strike a mage down to do their job, basically, if he's going to turn or get possessed or something like that. Ex-First Enchanter guy had planted all of these power crystals in under the ground, dropped it on the floor, and then put his foot down on it to push it down into the ground, into the mud, all the way around the table. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, he cast this spell all around the table, and it was this huge kind of enveloping bubble up around the Templars, and they all got up to sort of try and get out of it. And of course, Templars have anti-magical powers, so they start trying to work together to break through this thing, and it's taking all of his concentration to sustain this spell. So it's an ongoing spell, and he's just sustaining it on and on. Now, he's a First Enchanter power level, so he's magnificently powerful. A real handful for all of these Templars combined. But they should still be able to break through against his one spell. But they can't because of the focusing crystals all around. Every time they go to weaken it, the other focusing crystals re-empower it again. And they've been specially designed to do this, to empower the spell and send it around itself to enrich its circle of power. It's not just one thin, it's multiple stacked. Each crystal makes the spell envelop over itself again. So they tear one layer down and there's more layers underneath. It's like a great big onion they're trapped in now. And the onion just regrows itself again, trapped in this thing. And that is what our mage could see from the window. He could see the big bubble. Now, he wasn't able to take a shot at the mage down there on the ground because of the angle of the bubble was high enough to block out an ability for an arcane blast or a shot, a lance, or a spell to be able to get through, because the Orlesian First Enchanter was on the opposite side of the bubble, so it doesn't really allow the angle to get him. So it was clear that he was going to have to get out of the building somehow. Well, anyway, he can suddenly then hear sounds of fighting and distress and shouting and combat, spells being cast and furniture being knocked over. So, and that's coming from the next room over. Now, of course, he can't get to that room. So the only other way to it is across the window ledge. So he climbs out onto the window and tries to make his way along the ledge to get to the next place. So this is where he then had to do an acrobatics focus test. One thing I'm going to say about this is we know the character can't die in this prequel because, well, he's alive now, isn't he? So it's kind of like an Assassin's Creed idea, isn't it? Reliving the memory. And can you fulfill the memory to the way that it actually happened, i.e. success? And of course, if you do, then me as the GM, I would grant you a little something. Not experience necessarily, but maybe a little item. So in this case, a potion of your choice or something like that, a minor one. The idea here is that obviously if he fails the test, which he did, by the way, the test being a dexterity, acrobatics to try and get across the ledge. So he's not going to fall to his death. So he just sort of slipped a bit, and it's that sudden stamina usage, that whoa, 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 and he's got to put himself through personal strain, and this tires him. So it's that tiring that will knock like 2 or 3, chip that off the health score, just to kind of get that feeling across that tired him out a bit. Because essentially in combat, when you're fighting, it's, you know, you could be 1 health and you're getting quite tired at this point, but then when you get 0, you're so tired that you suddenly get sloppy enough to take that wound that actually then strikes you down and kills you. Because that's in a fight, it's usually the guy that gets tired first, isn't it? Like in a sword fight or something. Or like, you know, the opening breaks, but it's because the concentration is lapsed, because you've got tired, if you're sort of fairly equally matched. He manages to carry on shimmying along though, regains his balance, gets to the window, and then tries to get in. Now, the door is just ajar, and slightly moving, like something's just left the room, and he can see a downed mage in there that he knows. So he's got to get in there because the mage is now dying. So he's got only like 4 rounds left or whatever to live. So he tries to get the window open to climb into the room, but it's stuck. It's stuck fast. So we've got to do a strength might test. You know, he doesn't have focuses in any of these things because, well, he's a mage, isn't he? So he tries to get it open, fails initially, and then keeps struggling, then finally lifts it up, gets it open. And of course this is wasting rounds and the guy's dying. Now he could try a target number 11 cunning healing test to try and get him back up, because I do have some bandages there on hand in the room just in case he wants to give it a go, and it's just a way for him to be able to do a test like that if he so wishes. But no, he decided to use a healing spell. So he did something like 2d6 version of it, and rolled a 1 and a 1. So he healed him for only 2 health back up. But he managed to get back up and say his piece and say that he was attacked by some enraged corpses, and that they're at the other side of the door, and 2 of them. Right, now, the device for this, me as a GM, I'll talk you through what was going on here. Firstly, in the story, and then in the mechanics of why this was going to happen. So in the story, what has happened is that the blood mages have done a spell, done a ceremony, a big one that the first enchanter, the ex-first enchanters taught them, this massive blood magic ceremony within the tower, and they've all taken their own lives in a most bloody fashion, and it's just this circle of death created by their own demises. Now, it's created this welt in the Fade into Ferelden here. This has allowed, you know, with the welt, with the scratch, the blood comes through, and that's the first demons are coming through. Now, when demons come into the world, sometimes they get drawn to places of death. And so you very often find these rage demons inhabiting dead bodies. But they're very frustrated because they don't want to be in a dead body. They want to be in a live body. And so here they are, they're a rage demon. They've got all of the intelligence and malice of a demon, but they're stuck in a mouldering corpse. So they're a horrible, annoyed creature, even more annoyed at the limitations of their host form. So that's quite an interesting take, really, on undead in the world, isn't it? How they are, how they come about and how they are portrayed. Basically, they are just freshly dead, but, you know, magically imbued people, and they are wearing sigils and things to help further empower the host bodies, and they've fallen, and their mass sacrifice has attracted all of these rage demons into them. So we've got enraged corpses going around, and they are the Orlesians. They're dressed as the Orlesians, basically. Is the Orlesians are possessed by rage demons as corpses. So it's very, you know, cultist based. This is a suicide cult. Serious, serious stuff. Mechanical devices on this was to let him have a chance to work out how the healing thing works, but also, if the guy had died, then he may well have got possessed, and he would have faced the problem of having to fight an ex-friend of his, and he might not get warning that it's about to attack him, because it would have become an enraged demon, I would suspect. And or if he saved him, which he did save him, then he could warn him that there's two outside, and the two he would then have to fight outside or deal with in some way could then become one. And the idea was, try and save him if you can, because you don't have to fight two outside, you only have to deal with the one. They both open the door on 3, out they go. He runs straight towards them, does this big mighty rock fist spell straight for the floor to try and take the other two straight through the floor. It's a massive critical effect one. Smashes a hole right in the floor. A lot of these things I pre-rolled, you see, to make it faster. That's a good idea, really. If you know that something scripted is going to happen, you could either just write it scripted, or if you do want it to be rolled, why don't you just pre-roll all the effects and have it written down what happens as a result of those pre-rolls. So this big thing puts a great big hole in the floor, takes one of the enraged corpses down, accidentally takes himself down as well. They both fall through the floorboards. There's one enraged corpse left quite close to the hole in the floor there that leads down into the first floor below. So our mage is here and he's like, well, that's it. He rolls higher on the initiative roll, so he's going first. So he attacked with a basic arcane lance. Now that's the auto attack for the mages. He managed to immediately proc his dragon die to earn the chance of using some stunts. So he got 4 on the dragon die, was able to use a stunt to inflict an additional 1d6 to the enemy, but then also to skirmish the enemy 2 yards and 2 yards over the hole. And that spent his stunt points doing that. So basically he's hit him with the spell, and then the skirmish thing means that the enemy's staggered. So he staggers sort of sideways from the hit of it, all a bit sort of unsteady in this new host body, walks over the blimmin' hole and falls down through it. Now the creature tries to do a test to cling on quickly with its dexterity, but because it's not very used to its body, it fails that test and falls straight through the floor. So here, straight away, we see in Dragon Age how you can do things tactically and outmaneuver your opponent or remaneuver them. And in this case, if there is something tactically advantageous, you can take advantage of it. But watch out, of course, because again, NPCs can do this to you. But anyway, he was all right because this thing didn't even get to have a move against him. So he dealt with it. It fell through. He took a look through the hole himself, and it was very sooty, smoky, groggy. You can't see down through it. It's like an unpenetrable fog of smoke lies down there, but he can also hear fighting and sounds of something down there because, of course, there's 2 enraged corpses and his mage friend that's fallen through there, and he doesn't know what's going on. So he decides not to just jump down blindly into the murder hole of death, which is quite wise, I suppose. He wants to explore the level he's on. But options begin to get taken away from him. His hand starts to become forced to react to something. More horror begins to envelop him, around him, and emerge. So this area he's in is sort of a hallway that leads to a door at the end. And it's sort of an enclosed hallway. The door at the end starts rattling. And there's a real strain in on the wall, and some of the dust starts falling from the wall and from the ceiling and things. And then suddenly a part of the door just cracks and then boom, splits open backwards out through itself. And then the door starts shaking and buckling and moving like rubber, and suddenly the section of the door goes flying inwards and goes flying down the passage at him, and a bit of masonry comes in flying and lands on the floor there, and a bit of the floor, the wall as well, the surrounding archway around the door just gets pulled out, the doorway itself, and the door just gets completely destroyed forwards and backwards, as if bits are pulling it and pushing it. These like vortex interchanging forces just tears the whole section apart. And of course this huge big chunk of fade is open before him. And I was looking at the player and I said, don't worry, it looks worse than it is. So what he sees before him is a bit different this time, because it isn't just swirling vortexes and just madness. I mean, it is that, but also he sees this massive, big, like floating, spiraling black river. So a black floating river. But then upon closer inspection, It turns out that it's not a river at all. In fact, it is thousands upon thousands upon thousands of shades flowing through the Fade. Now, shades are the souls of deceased people who've become these tormented creatures, kind of black in colour, and they exist in the Fade, but from time to time one of them might get through into the living realm, and they tend to dislike built-up areas, cities, people, so they try to go to remote places and haunt them, which is why you get that lonely old kind of cave somewhere, or old shack, or old tower somewhere, and it's got like a shade in it or something. You know, they're perfectly fine where they are. This is where they live. It's the Fade. They're in the Fade. They're staying in the Fade. They're just flowing from A to B inside the Fade. Everything's fine. Until something happens. Further on, deeper as our mage was looking into this big open area of Fade, there's a place where further up the way there'd be a door, right? So it's effectively flat at this point, and you can't tell it's a door there at the moment. And then someone at the corridor coming at it has opened the door, and it's opened out into the Fade. So suddenly his first idea that there's a door there is that this door just goes like that, opens out into the thin air of the Fade. And he's like, whoa, okay, there's a door. And then suddenly a Tranquil, who was a mage that has had all of his emotions and feelings robbed of him so that he can't become a possessed person, is pushed over the edge out of the door by an enraged corpse, and he falls into the Fade. It's one of the mage helper type people that live in the tower. And he falls, obviously still with a stupid grin on his face, because that's what they do. I thought that was quite funny. And he falls into the black river of shades. How crazy, right? Upon colliding, it creates this sort of splash effect of like their essence, their ectoplasm, whatever the hell it is, just scatters up into these places. And it disperses a few of them, sort of thing, here and there a little bit. But one of them disperses in panic. They don't want to disperse straight towards this opening where our mage is standing. It's just coming through thin air, screeching at him, it's coming straight his way. So I'm like, what are you going to do? Now, if he'd have said, right, I'm going to start auto-attacking, I'm going to cast a spell, Hadouken, or whatever he's going to do, I'd start to calculate, okay, distance, speed that the thing moves, amount of rounds I'll give you, or I might just roll a d6 and say, you've got that many rounds before it gets here, go! But no, he didn't say that. He said, I'm going to dodge. Right, okay. So I had to do a dexterity, the acrobatics again, to try and get out of the way. Anyway, he failed his dexterity check versus this thing coming in, and it passed right through him. Now, shades have this effect. They've got like this horrible aura effect that just drains your health away. And of course, this one passing right through him was bad business. So he lost health, this thing coming in. And he tried to reason with it. So I said, all right, try reasoning with it if that's what you wish to do. I haven't really thought it out how he's going to deal with these problems. But, you see, I GM in a very, very loose way to allow player ideas to just play out, and I'll let them try anything they want. Basically, I might put you in a seemingly unescapable situation against something that you might think is unkillable for your level or ability, but I will let you find a way of doing it if you're clever enough. And I'll do everything in my power to let you do that. So I don't even think of a solution for the player. That's the player's job, not mine. He tries reasoning with this thing. So, you know, he did his communications test and whatever, and persuade. And he tries. He then puts his own argument into the mix. So he came up with the idea of, look, I don't want any trouble with you. You don't really want to be here, and that's right, because I told him that's what shades are like anyway. So, you know, I gave him that one on the house to add to it. But then he made the point of saying, well, don't attack me. You know, I've got no problem with you. Just tell me how I get out of here, and I'll leave you alone and I'll just leave. Just tell me the way out. That was his argument. Now, I sat there as a GM, and I thought, well, right, okay, that wasn't really very good in your favour, you saying that, because the shade doesn't know where the bloody hell it is, right? It's just come into our world. When it did live, it wouldn't have lived here, in all likelihood, would it? It might have lived in some other country somewhere, for all we know, right? So him saying, tell me the way out, isn't going to help, is it? was standing in the mortal realm. It's out of its realm. So that isn't going to help as persuasiveness. So that didn't go heavily in his favour towards the test. If he'd have said something a bit better, it might have. All he did do is basically confuse it, because it didn't make any sense even to the damn shade. So he's stuck there, wondering what to do next. And the player's like, okay, what am I going to do? Well, and I said, well, it's still there. It seems confused, looking around and trying to make sense of things. He decided to do a runner, not try and fight it. And so I let him. So he ran back to the room he'd come from, where he'd found the dying mage, and quickly shut the door behind him. And he determined, right, I'm going to climb out of the window, the one that was stuck when he climbed in. So he climbed out of the window and hung from the ledge. Now, as he was climbing out of the window and getting into the hanging position, of course, the shade came into the room straight through the door. It's ethereal, you see, and it came for him. It decided to attack. So it's going for the window, and he's like, yeah, fat chance. And he drops. So he drops from the hanging position to try and fall to the floor below, where there's another window below on the first floor. So he falls to the first floor and quickly tries to clench the frame. Now, based on the awkwardness of the ledge size at the window and all sort of thing, he tries to grip onto it, and I get him to do a test there. And I think it was strength to try and pull himself back up into the window and whatever, and he was failing initially, and it left him flailing about with one hand, and there he's hanging, and he's got to try and, with all his strength, pull himself back up and get onto the ledge, well, all this sort of thing. Now, the shade doesn't follow him down, so he's all right there. But, of course, the strain of that takes a little bit more health out of him as well. And he finally pulls himself up and slides the window up opening and gets in on that floor very quietly. When he goes in here, it is very, very dark, and I tell him that he senses a presence coming. Now, he's down a bit of health now at this point. I can't recall how much he had left at this point. He wanted to try and do a heal spell, basically, upon getting in. And his heal spell had been okay, but it hadn't been perfect, but it had put him up to 20 out of 21 at least. But now this devouring corpse thing was coming and looking for him, and it was actually the corpse of the mage. The other two that had fallen through here, we don't know what had happened to them. I guess they've wandered off somewhere. But the mage, his ex-friend, who's now succumbed in this fight down here and become one of them. Anyway, so he was healed for now. He's looking for him. Now, this is where he says, well, I'm screwed then, aren't I? And I was like, not necessarily. Now, I wanted to give him a chance here, because he wasn't doing too good here trying to figure out what to do. And he looked a bit sort of like deep out at sea here. So I said, well, your mage training tells you, your instinct even tells you, that you might be able to quiet your mind and hide from this thing. But you feel as if it's reaching out, sensing for your presence. So, I suggested, undead, rage demon, tries to do a perception searching, because it's searching constantly on patrol, so not specific searching, just general searching. So that's in his favour. Versus willpower self-discipline test. Now, if he can quiet his mind, control his breathing, relax his body, and not give away too much of his own sense of presence. Now, he passed that test because willpower is very much in his favour. So he managed to calm his mind at that correct moment. And so what I let him do, the undead thing walked out into the hallway, and I let him remain completely quiet there at the window, crouched down, and it turned away from him. It was looking 180 degrees away down the hallway, down the way on. So he stays there. Now I allow him to take a breather. I point out that he can also take a breather. And this thing's not moving, it's just standing there in position, kind of like sentry. Like it's lost the feeling of the presence, and it's going to wait till it gets another presence type feeling and then start heading for it. He takes advantage of this opportunity and does a rest. So he gets some health back from doing that as well. So yeah, he's doing all right on health at this point. He says, well, what are my options? What can I see? So I explained to him completely. I said, well, all right, here's the situation. You've got the window behind you that you just came in. You're on the first floor now. Ahead of you is the corridor. The thing is standing in the middle of the corridor. It's facing the other way. At the end of the corridor, you know that section ends in a stairwell that goes down and leads down to the ground floor. You know that for a fact, just at the end of this corridor. Also, closer to you, but just behind the undead, to the left side of the corridor is a door. Just basically 4 options he would be able to pull here. Either A, try and climb back out of the window and fall like he did the floor above, down to the ground floor, as it were. Or sneak to try and open that door that leads off that corridor that's just behind. But it was quite close behind the thing, I might add, so there's a chance he'd get detected. Maybe, maybe not. It'd be a posed test, that one. Or attack the thing, and he'd get a free surprise round against it if he chose to try. Or make a bolt past it, try and run past it. As it turns out, he didn't know this, but he's actually got 2 speed more than it, so he would have got a surprise round of it being surprised that he's running right past it, and it wouldn't have been able to react initially. So he'd have got that free movement, and then he would have beaten it, because he'd have then got to go again and carry on moving down the stairwell, and then it would have tried pursuing, but he would have always been ahead of it, and he's always got 2 movement more than it, so he would have beaten it and been to the ground floor first. So he didn't know really what to do, and this is where his issues were kicking in a bit, and he was becoming problematic as a player with me, and start having a go at me, to be honest, and things were breaking down between us in me being able to effectively run this for him. And obviously I'd done a lot of work in preparation for this, working out what all the different tests would be and their target numbers, and the sort of the storyline for it, just for him, just catered for him. And of course he was getting in a bit of a shitty mood, really. So he tried a shock spell at the thing, and the shock spell failed. But I had it that it failed in such a way that the shock fell short and didn't even get close enough to make a noise, really. It dissipated soon after leaving his finger, so that it didn't give away his presence still, trying to cast that. But he was obviously, his mana was down a bit more. But again, you see, he's being too downer on that, because he can always still auto-attack if need be. You've always got that to fall back down on. And of course you can also put focuses into your arcane lands, and you can start going that way and really specialising in it. But anyway, upon trying to work out what he was going to try and do, he ended up not doing anything, and that's pretty much where our session with him broke down. He decided that he was just going to be too busy complaining at me, complaining about the thing we're doing, and just having a go at me generally, for me to be in any mood to be able to continue with him. So I just took the paper and ripped it up. So here I am on camera, recording it for posterity. When you mess with me, I'll take the paperwork and I'll take the results of what we're doing, and I'll rip it the hell up right in front of your face if you piss me off. And there was no nice way of covering it, really, was there? He had to leave and we couldn't finish it, because you'd be asking, well, why didn't you just finish it later? You see, nothing would ever make sense unless I said this to you. So from that point on, we don't really know what that mage did. He had a little mental breakdown there, I guess, in that hallway. Maybe he stayed in that corner and cowered until the whole thing was over and sorted out. Or maybe his brains got eaten. I don't know. Who knows? But all I do know is that it was solved eventually. The Templars took control again. They managed to distract the first enchanter guy to stop his spell. They managed to get someone out there to... I mean, basically what he'd have had to have done is got to the ground floor, gone up to the first enchanter guy, the X guy, and tickled him under the armpits. And that would have been enough. And, he'd not been able to focus his spell, giggling like a little girl, and the entire table of Templars would be loose on his ass. And that would be it. He wouldn't have to deal with him. The Templars would. But no. It could have been golden. It could have had a nice memory. He could have had something to recall to the rest of the team. And now he just gets to say that that character cowered like a little baby while people sorted it out. The reason it wouldn't be explained in the canon then, after that, is because it was of a very sensitive nature, and they didn't want the politics of an Orlesian attack just after the war having been politically made on them, especially given the fact that it wasn't a sanctioned attack. It was a you know, it was a criminal even from Orlais, and it was they didn't do the rite of cleansing because it was very clear that it was the troublemakers trying to do that, and if they did the rite of cleansing, they would have given them the exactly what they wanted. As for the thing itself, because it wasn't an absolute tear in the fade, they were able to cover it up. Because it was only a welt, they managed to get it closed up that very night. I'd liken it to a paper cut, really. Sometimes those really hurt more than they should. Alright, well, that brings us to a close then on the recap of this 1-to-1 with the Circle Mage, who will now never be. But this will lead up to the community question of the day, which is, what sort of problems have you ever had with troublesome, problematic players, and how bad have disagreements ever got at the table? How did it end up? Did you make up in the end, or, you know, did anyone end up permanently leaving the group? I'd like to hear below in your comments. And with that, we shall wrap things up. I'll see you at the next video. Keep watching the Dragon Age series and the rest of the gaming playlist too. Take care, and I'll see you at the table.